Hello, sisters. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. I'm Carol Zinn, a sister of St. Joseph from Philadelphia, the Executive Director of LCWR.
And I'm Mary Hughes, a Dominican sister from Amityville, New York, and the Director of Transition Services.
We'd like to begin our time with you this afternoon by placing this brief conversation that we'll have, and then inviting you to have a conversation with your team in the context of the LCWR Call 2015 to 2022. And I'm just going to share with all of us the prologue. Standing on the rich history of our past and the communion present among us, we, the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, commit ourselves to seeking God, who beckons to us from a future abundant in grace, full of challenge, and rich in possibility. As we live the years ahead, we remain inspired by the radical call of the gospel, filled with hope, and committed to discerning together the leading of God's Spirit. Affirming LCWR's mission and setting direction for the coming years, we embrace our time as holy, our leadership as gift, and our challenges as blessing. And so we come to you today to begin a conversation and an invitation to a conversation that really does pick up on the heart of that prologue, that our times are holy, our leadership is a gift, and the challenges that we look at are really blessings. We also come to you today in the spirit of the 2019 Assembly, where we heard from Pat Murray the invitation to widen our tents, to cross borders, to celebrate our luxurious diversity, where we heard in the emerging orientations an invitation for LCWR to be more global in its understanding of sisterhood, to explore perhaps porous borders, and to develop partnerships among and beyond us. Mary and I come to you today in the spirit of the prologue and the themes of the Assembly of 2019, with an invitation as we look at the next several months of furthering some work that Mary began 5 years ago.
For 5 years now, it has been my privilege to meet so many of you as I worked with the GHR Sisters Support Project. And the ways that I have met you have been at regional meetings, sometimes at diocesan meetings, perhaps initiated by your vicar for religious, sometimes at community days, and for many of you, I've met you on Zoom. And I've worked, in addition to that, with about 40 communities with multiple visits and working with them as they moved along and looking at their future. And you have taught me a great deal over this time. Some of the learnings that I have, I think are important as we look at our future together. We know that we are at a kind of historic and unique point in time where we have all discovered that the kinds of procedures, structures, ways of doing things that worked so well for us for so many years are no longer effective. Things that we needed when we were much larger are now burdensome as we are smaller. So we look at ways of doing things differently. As communities work out new ways of doing this, I've discovered some things. One is that they do it together. I am not seeing any community thinking they have a future all by themselves. They're not giving up their charisms, but working collaboratively to kind of create, if you will, just a lovely mosaic of charisms of different communities working together for the sake of the life. I also discovered that the relationships that it help people to and communities to work together are really formed geographically. Well, I might have thought it would be by charism family. sometimes the distances between members of the Carol Zinn family seem to get in the way. Rather, the relationships that were formed by different communities, with the friendships that were there, the projects that they were already working on, paved the way for these communities to work together on these kinds of initiatives. But we also know that after 5 years, these are all the communities that I've been able to reach, and there are so many more. And so we look now, are there other ways to be able to reach out and to support the kinds of initiatives that you so need to have happen, and to do that together? And I think Carol will tell you a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Mary. We're very grateful to the GHR Foundation for their invitation, really, for us to think differently based on the learnings that we've experienced these past 5 years and the wonderful work that Mary has offered. And they invited us to think about how we might address the leadership needs, which of course for us as LCWR always rests in the canonical responsibility that our members have, that you have for your institutes. And one of Mary's learnings is around the whole capacity that institutes have or find out that they do not have for serving the role of elected leadership or appointed leadership. And so I'd like to speak just for a few minutes about what Mary and I are calling meaning making, and how this next iteration of the use of the GHR funds for the ministries that support our sisters in transition, about how we are inviting you to participate in that. I want to begin by sharing just a brief little piece from the book, The Moral Imagination by John Paul Lederach. One autumn day when Basho and one of his disciples were going through a rice field, the disciple composed a haiku on a red dragonfly that caught his fancy. He showed the following haiku to Basho. This is what it said. Take a pair of wings from a dragonfly, you would make a pepper pod. No, said Basho, that is not a haiku. You kill the dragonfly. If you want to compose a haiku and give life to it, you must say, add a pair of wings to a pepper pod, and you would make a dragonfly. When Mary and I considered the reversal in that haiku, we found a profound insight. The difference between taking a pair of wings from a dragonfly and creating a pepper pod, and adding a pair of wings to a pepper pod and creating a dragonfly, is precisely where we find the invitation to meaning making, to what is going on now in many institutes of religious congregations that belong to LCWR. And that is predominantly around the reality of capacity for canonical leadership. One of the things that we would like to invite you to consider is that the integrity of an institute is really, really important, as you know. And according to the Church, the integrity of an institute is maintained by having its own leadership. When an institute finds that it does not have the capacity for its own leadership, then other steps need to happen. And that's so important because the integrity of an institute has primarily to do with the sustaining and furthering of the charism, as well as the vocational history of every member who ever was in that institute, is, or will be. It is also the spiritual heritage of your institute. And of course, the contribution that your institute has made to the life of the gospel and its contribution to the world. And so the importance of governance is really critical to an institute. We want to share with you that as we explore this reality that is unfolding for us, that part of what Mary learned is that each institute going this journey on its own is really not sustainable. The other thing we want to share with you is that when you look at religious life in Canada or in Australia, which are pretty much our two nearest neighbors, not geographically perhaps, but in terms of a global northern western sense of religious life, LCWR is quite unique. It's unique in that both Canada and Australia have only one conference for men and women religious. But even more importantly, LCWR is unique in its profile, meaning the number of institutes that we have, and also in its historical position, that where we are right now historically with that profile. And so it gives us an opportunity then to discern together how we might move forward. And when we say that, we're talking specifically about how we might share governance, how we might think about how to move through this historical time together rather than one institute at a time. And towards that end, we would like to invite you to a conversation as a leadership team after this little video. There's a reflection sheet, as you've already seen. And would also like to invite you to participate in one of 5 geographical gatherings that we are able to have across the country. They'll take place in April, May, and June. There will be 2 of them held on the East Coast, 2 held in the Midwest, and 1 in the Southwest. And all of this information is available to you on some of the reflection papers that we've provided along with this video. We're asking at least 2 members from each leadership team, regardless of what your sense of your situation is as you look at your capacity for governance. We're asking you to seriously consider coming and being part of these conversations. It is an exploration in fidelity to LCWR's mission, which is really focused on anticipatory leadership. How can we together discern where we are across the LCWR communities, what needs are emerging, and how together we might be able to discern a way forward. And so we strongly encourage you to plan to come to one of those 5 gatherings. The other piece we would like to share with you with great joy is that the GHR assistance has also provided the resources to be able to actually begin creating, piloting an opportunity to do collaborative governance. And we just want to be clear that while there are some movements already present with institutes having commissaries, there are also some movements towards that. There are also a couple of very creative ways that religious congregations are already trying to attend to this anticipatory leadership need that they will have. We want to simply provide a venue for that conversation to happen for all of us, because whatever happens to one of us does in fact happen to all of us.
Well, as Carol alluded to, we want to enhance the fruitfulness of the opportunity we have for conversation. So there is a reflection sheet that accompanies this video. And we're hoping that you're watching this video, if at all possible, as a leadership team together rather than individually, so that the discussion can follow immediately after. The reflection sheet is to really help us all to get in touch with what the reality really is of our congregation. And so on it, there will be questions that encourage you to speak truthfully and identify not only where your congregation will be at its next chapter, but what about the chapter after that? Will you have sufficient members to be delegates? Will you have sufficient members to be part of a leadership election? Could you put together a council? This is not to be frightened, but to address the reality that sometimes we think we have more time ahead of us than we actually do. So by answering and responding to these questions thoughtfully, by sharing some of that information with us ahead of time, as you'll be invited to do, we'll be able to be more clear about how we want to structure those meetings together. It will give you and us a critical look at your reality. There will be opportunities, as Carol said, to look at alternative ways of doing things as we come together. And you'll be coming together geographically. So many of you have already begun conversations at that level, and you'll be able to continue. For others, it might be an initiation into that kind of conversation. And by naming what your greatest needs are, you will help us as LCWR by naming what your greatest needs are. How do we support your leadership during this time? How do we help you feel confident about making the moves that you will need to make? How do we feel, how can we support you in addressing the spiritual dimension of why we're doing so many moves, or why the moves are important and indeed essential? Because we have a wonderful opportunity in front of us. We're about creating the future. We could just stay home and allow the future to happen, but it's much more exciting to be part of the initiative that explores something new, not for the sake so much even of the preservation of our own individual community, but for the sake of the life. There is, in addition to our own charisms, a charism of religious life that together we can create, strengthen, and allow to move forward.
I really appreciate you saying that last part, Mary, in particular, that the charism of religious life. Pat Murray talked about that at the Assembly. Many of our newer, younger members are talking about the charism of religious life, cross-congregation, cross-charism, cross-culture. And the other piece I really appreciated was your insight about the choice that we have, to kind of back into the future. And one of the learnings that you brought to us from the 5 years of ministry was there was hardly a conversation that a leadership team had with you who said, we started this conversation too soon. It was exactly the opposite. Leadership teams have told us we should have been having the conversation about our capacity for governance, meaning canonically elected or appointed leadership. We should have been having it 7, 8, or 9 years ago. And so, sisters, we are certainly not in a mode of panic. We are in a mode of urgency, though, as we look carefully and faithfully to what does it mean to be leading now, at a time where, while this is not about numbers, there is something about the demographic imperative. While it's not about age, there is something about the chronological capacity that an institute has. And to not be caught short by, I almost want to say, a sense of denial that is unintended. As Mary said, most congregations seem to feel that they're okay for several more chapters because they have some people under 70 years of age. One of the reasons for this invitation to this discerning collaborative conversation is to be able to help each other, to be able to really see how might we be able to be of support to one another as we each go our particular historical journey. The other thing I wanted to offer is that sometimes congregations think that this conversation is for when you have fewer than 20 members or something. One of the things we're seeing at the national level is that even congregations who have 100 or 200 members, they are beginning to raise the question about whether they have capacity for elected leadership in the next chapter or two. And so we really feel that this moment in time is really a gift. It is a blessing, even though it's a challenge. Our leadership is a gift, and these times are really holy, very holy times. And so we encourage you, as you turn now to each other, using the reflection sheet to have some reflective conversation with each other. We encourage you to look at the dates of these 5 geographical gatherings. They are deliberately geographical and not regional. And they will be in hotels near airports. All of this is funded. I think it's really an affirmation from outside folks like GHR to say to us, there's something about the times that mean that this is the right conversation to be having. So we encourage you to put a date on your calendar so that we'll be able to be together at one of these 5 gatherings. At the end of those gatherings, we will be able to put some kind of profile together so that we, as LCWR together, rather than just 1 or 2 institutes going their own journey, that we might be able to see together what is the direction that God is inviting us to discern. So thank you again, sisters, for your time. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for the gift that you are to your own community and to religious life as a whole. Please know that LCWR keeps you and your members in our prayers, and we are deeply grateful for your time with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we really look forward to seeing you at these meetings in the spring. God bless.